This is the Lex Beyond podcast by Lexicon Labs. I'm Lex.
And I'm Bianca. Okay, let's unpack this. Throughout human history, whenever people have desperately wanted to predict the future, they've almost always turned to the mystical.
Right, like staring into tea leaves or something.
Exactly. You think of the oracle at Delphi breathing in fumes in a cave, or a mystic gazing into a crystal ball, or someone reading the alignment of the stars. We have this deep-seated psychological desire for the future to be revealed to us by something opaque.
Something fundamentally supernatural, yeah.
Yeah.
We want the answers handed down from a force outside of our control.
Yeah, but what if the ultimate oracle isn't made of glass or smoke? What if instead it is built out of sterile spreadsheets, massive matching engines, thousands of tiny financial transactions, and, pure, unfiltered human greed?
It is a much messier, far more cynical way to look at the future. I mean, you're no longer asking the gods for an answer.
Well,
You are crowdsourcing the truth from thousands of self-interested people who are just trying to make a buck. But as the history of economics and computer science has shown, that messy, greed-fueled mechanism is arguably the most accurate lie detector humanity has ever invented.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore one of the wildest, most multi-layered sagas in modern financial history for you.
Oh, it really is wild.
It's insane. We are tracing a story that begins on the chaotic, screaming trading floors of Wall Street, moves through the tax havens of Ireland, intersects with the cutting edge of data science, and ultimately culminates in a literal, heartbreaking tragedy on the slopes of Mount Everest.
Yeah, and we have a really massive stack of sources in front of us today to help us navigate this.
We do. We are pulling from deep financial journalism, some incredibly dense but fascinating blog posts from academic computer scientists, a massive BuzzFeed retrospective on prediction markets, and a structured historical document called the Tradesports story.
And if there's a central philosophical tension running through all of these documents, it's a question of mechanics and limits.
Right. Can the exact same financial tools used to trade thousands of tons of orange juice or cotton futures be used to predict the capture of a dictator?
Or the exact vice presidential pick of a political candidate, or the precise outcome of a federal election.
Exactly. And the ultimate question we have to answer is, if these tools are really that good, why did the United States government spend years fighting so incredibly hard to hunt the founders down and shut the whole thing down?
That is the paradox we have to unravel today. Because on the surface, this story looks like it's just about gambling.
Yeah, it really does.
But the economists and the computer scientists in our sources insist it is actually about a concept called information discovery. This entire saga is a massive, real-world stress test of the wisdom of crowds theory.
Right. Testing whether a decentralized crowd of average people with real money on the line is smarter than a panel of highly credentialed experts.
Exactly.
So to understand how you even begin to build a machine like that, we have to go back to the origin point. We are setting the scene in 1999 on the floor of the New York Board of Trade.
And for those who haven't seen it in old movies, you have to imagine the pure sensory overload of this environment. The yelling, the aggressive hand signals, just the chaotic energy of open outcry trading.
Right, and we have two brothers at the center of this, John and Sean McNamara, and they are commodities traders. They spend their days in the pit buying and selling contracts for physical goods like cotton and sugar.
And it's important to understand exactly what they are doing mechanically. They aren't physically buying a truckload of sugar and storing it in their garage.
Right, they'd need a really big garage for that.
Right, exactly. They are dealing in futures contracts. So a futures contract is essentially a binding agreement to buy or sell a specific amount of a commodity at a specific price at a specific date in the future.
Right. It is a way for companies to hedge against risk. Like, if you run a cereal company, you need to know what your sugar costs will be 6 months from now.
Yeah, so you buy a futures contract to lock in the price. The McNamaras were the middlemen facilitating that risk transfer. It is the bedrock of global physical trade.
But standing there in the pit, the McNamaras have this incredible epiphany. Between screaming at the top of their lungs about winter wheat, they're just talking to their buddies about sports.
It's like anyone at work, right?
Yeah, and John realizes something profound. He effectively says, I know infinitely more about the New York Giants defensive line than I do about agricultural weather patterns in Brazil.
Which is completely fair.
Right. So he says, why in the world are we trading orange juice when we could be trading football teams?
It sounds like a joke you'd make at a bar, but if you look at it through the lens of pure market mechanics, it is a brilliant leap of logic.
Wait, so they're treating a football team like a pork belly?
Basically, yeah. They realize that the mathematical architecture of a commodities exchange is entirely agnostic. The math doesn't care what the underlying asset is. A contract is just a contract.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if you could trade the probability of a freeze destroying the Florida orange crop, you can theoretically trade the probability of the New York Giants winning the Super Bowl. The math scales perfectly.
So they start building the architecture. But they know they need a specific kind of mind. So they recruit a guy named Ron Bernstein.
Yeah, another floor trader.
Yeah.
But our sources note a really fascinating detail about him. He was a very serious, high-end collector of toys and action figures.
Which seems like such a quirky detail.
It does, but it actually tells you everything you need to know about how his brain works.
Yeah.
He is someone who innately understands subjective value.
Right. He gets how a piece of plastic can be worth $5 to one person and $5,000 to another based entirely on scarcity and crowd desire.
Exactly. So when they pitch in this idea, he instantly gets it.
He doesn't see it as a gimmick.
No, he sees it as the natural, inevitable evolution of tradable assets. Everything that holds uncertain future value should be tradable on an open exchange.
So by the fall of 2000, they realize they need serious financial structuring. So they bring on an Irish accountant named John Delaney.
And Delaney is crucial to this story. He had a very solid background in traditional finance, working at Allied Irish Bank. They bring him on as VP of Finance to give the operation legitimacy.
And it works. They raise $13.5 million.
And this isn't just family and friends. The heaviest hitters in the financial world are buying in. Paul Tudor Jones, a billionaire hedge fund manager, puts in $6.5 million.
Yeah, the sources even detail how they pitched Lachlan Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch's son. He literally flew via private helicopter to an estate in Greenwich just to hear the pitch. And he bought in too.
It's just wild.
Okay, I have to pause here because we need to define the fundamental concept of what they are actually building. If I want to place a $50 bet on the Giants, my historical options are to go to Vegas or find a guy named Tony in a back room.
Right, a bookie.
Yeah, so if these Wall Street guys are taking my $50 on the Giants, why do I care if the guy taking my money is a bookie or a guy on a trading floor? Isn't it all just gambling?
That is the exact question that the federal government will eventually use to try and destroy them. But strictly mechanically, there's a difference between a bookmaker and a financial exchange.
Okay, break that down for me.
So in traditional betting, a bookie acts the house. The bookie sets the odds based on what they think will happen, and they take the other side of your bet. They're actively managing their own risk.
Right, so if I bet with a bookie, I'm playing against the house. And the house always engineers the math so that over the long run, they win.
Precisely. They build in a profit margin, the vig or the juice. But an exchange, which is what they were building, doesn't take sides. An exchange is purely a matchmaking engine.
It is completely indifferent to the outcome of the game.
Exactly. If you want to bet $50 the Giants will win, the exchange simply searches its order book for another user somewhere else in the world who wants to bet $50 the Giants will lose.
It just pairs you two up.
Yeah, holds the money in escrow, and when the game is over, hands the winner the pot. The exchange itself never risks a single cent on the game.
And their profit model is just a tiny transaction fee, like a toll booth operator.
Exactly. They just take a microscopic percentage for providing the service. It is a pure, unadulterated market. The odds are dictated entirely by what the global crowd of users is willing to pay.
I like to think of it like real estate. A bookie is like one of those companies that buys your house for cash. They take the risk of holding the house and they try to flip it.
Right.
But an exchange is just the open real estate market.
Okay.
It's just the platform where a willing buyer and a willing seller meet, and the platform takes a broker's fee.
That's a highly accurate way to visualize it. So armed with this logic and flush with millions in Wall Street capital, the team has the supreme confidence to launch.
But they almost immediately slam headfirst into a massive geographical and legal wall.
They do. They officially launch on August 2nd, 2001, but they launch in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And they go absolutely huge with the marketing.
Yeah, wrapping virtually every black taxi in London with massive branding that just says Intrade.com.
They chose the UK because the regulatory environment there was historically much more permissive regarding gambling. But the U.S. market is covered in this terrifying legal cloud.
Because literally 2 days before their massive London launch, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in the U.S. handed down a devastating ruling.
Yeah, they affirmed Wire Act violations against another pioneer in the sports exchange space, a guy named Jay Cohen.
And this wasn't a slap on the wrist. Cohen had been running his site offshore, thinking he was outside U.S. jurisdiction, but the U.S. government effectively dragged him back and put him on a path straight to federal prison.
The message from the Department of Justice was crystal clear. We do not care if your math is elegant. If you are facilitating bets on sports over the internet, we consider it illegal online gambling, and we will lock you up. And that regulatory friction creates a massive financial bleed. They couldn't market to the U.S. The company lost a reported $9 million across 2001 and 2002.
They were hemorrhaging cash.
Yeah, and they did have non-sports contracts available, like financials and current events, but the public essentially ignored them. The overwhelming volume was sports.
And sports was the exact thing that could get the founders thrown into a federal penitentiary.
So feeling the heat of the DOJ, the American founders realized they need to make a drastic structural pivot.
Right. Bernstein and the American crew decide to step back. They create a new entity called Tradesports, and they make John Delaney, the Irish accountant, the CEO.
He becomes the sole public face of the company, safely operating out of Dublin, Ireland, desperately trying to put the Atlantic Ocean between themselves and the American legal system.
But even with Delaney in Ireland, they're still trapped in this sports betting purgatory. They need a catalyst to prove their platform can do more than just facilitate bets on soccer games.
And in late 2003, that catalyst arrives. It fundamentally changes the trajectory of the entire industry.
Because at this point, according to an academic study in our sources, Tradesports is nearly 84% sports. Financials and current events are barely registering it.
It was a sports book masquerading as an exchange. But then geopolitics intervenes. The U.S. invasion of Iraq has occurred, and the search for Saddam Hussein seems completely stalled.
Right, 8 months have passed. The military trail is cold.
But out of nowhere, the Tradesports market for a contract based on the exact date of Saddam Hussein's capture starts moving.
Aggressively. Huge volume pours into the platform, predicting he will be caught immediately.
And exactly 2 days later, the global news breaks. The U.S. military hold a press conference. Saddam Hussein has been found hiding in a hole near Tikrit.
The Tradesports market knew he was captured before the global news media knew. It knew before the American public knew. When I read that, my jaw genuinely dropped.
It is the holy grail for the computer scientists studying these platforms. This is information discovery in its purest form, because this wasn't a lucky guess.
No, this was the matching engine reacting to secret information. Someone knew something.
And instead of keeping it a secret, they pulled up a web browser and tried to secretly profit off it by placing a bet. When you attach a financial reward to the truth, people with hidden truths have an overwhelming incentive to reveal them.
So the market was basically acting as a global lie detector or a polygraph for geopolitical secrets.
Exactly. The market acts as a vacuum, sucking up dispersed secrets and translating them into a single price tag.
But wait, how is this any different from illegal insider trading on Wall Street? If someone in the military knows Saddam is captured and places a bet before the press release, isn't that illegal?
Under strict financial law definitions, it is functionally identical to insider trading. But here is the massive paradigm shift. In prediction markets, the economists actually want insider trading.
Wait, really? Why would you want a rigged game?
Because the primary goal of a prediction market isn't fairness. In a casino, the goal is fairness. In traditional stocks, the goal is a level playing field. But here, the sole goal is to accurately price reality.
Oh, I see.
The market is an instrument of truth. And the truth is revealed the fastest when the people with the most accurate inside information are aggressively driving the price.
So the insider trading is the electricity that powers the polygraph.
Exactly. And when Delaney sees this unfold, a massive light bulb goes off. They realize geopolitical events could drive massive, predictive volume.
And it gives them a lifeline away from sports betting. They realize they're running an intelligence agency powered by crowdsourced greed.
But they know the Saddam capture could be dismissed as a fluke. They need a massive proving ground. And the 2004 U.S. presidential election provides exactly that.
Right. George W. Bush versus John Kerry. Now, before we dive into the 2004 election, I need to explicitly remind you listening that while the sources discuss deeply partisan election cycles, this deep dive is completely neutral.
Right, absolutely.
We are just reporting on how the market processed these historical events. We are not endorsing any candidate. The matching engine running Intrade did not care about ideology. It processed political fervor strictly as numerical data.
And in 2004, Intrade proved it could process that data better than the traditional polling industry. The in-trade market showed a remarkably consistent lead for George W. Bush.
And on election night, the market had called every single state correctly the day before the election.
It was a masterclass in predictive accuracy. The narrative shifted to revolutionary forecasting tool. A Washington Post article from October 2004 breaks down how this worked using their $10 contract.
Right, let's dive into the mechanics of this. Instead of Vegas odds, every contract is a binary option that pays out exactly $10 if the event happens and 0 if it doesn't.
So, using baseball as an example, if the market believes the Boston Red Sox have a precisely 57% chance of winning, the contract costs exactly $5.70.
And if they win, it matures at $10 and you make $4.30 profit. But if they lose, it expires worthless.
And this price fluctuates in real time, which is where human psychology collides with cold mathematics. The article profiles a trader named Cisco, a diehard Yankees fan.
Right, and the Yankees went up 3-0 against the Red Sox, a seemingly insurmountable lead.
But then the Red Sox win Game 4 and Game 5. The contracts for the Yankees to win the series plummeted in value, but Cisco stubbornly held on. He let his fandom override the math. And of course, the Red Sox completed the comeback.
And that specific anecdote is the key to understanding why prediction markets beat polling. What Cisco experienced is the direct financial punishment for cognitive bias.
Exactly. When a pollster asks who you prefer, you give an ideological answer. There's no penalty for wishful thinking. But when a market forces you to put money on the line, it strips away that ideology.
But isn't a crowd just a bunch of individuals? If individual polls are wrong, why wouldn't a crowd of people looking at those same polls also be wrong? Doesn't the market just aggregate the stupidity?
It's a common critique.
Mm-hmm.
But in a market, you don't need everyone to be smart. You only need a tiny percentage of highly informed individuals to recognize the conventional wisdom is flawed.
Oh, right.
If 90% of the crowd blindly follows a bad poll, the 10% who know the poll is bad will pour vast amounts of capital into betting against the crowd, moving the price to reflect reality.
The smart money swallows the dumb money.
Exactly. So Delaney boldly declares that hedging political risk is the next frontier in asset management, attracting legendary investor Dean LeBaron.
The guy who essentially invented the index fund.
Yes. It feels like they are on the verge of completely revolutionizing global finance.
But just as they reach the zenith, the U.S. government closes in. Despite moving toward politics, the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, investigates them.
Because between 2003 and 2005, the company had also been offering contracts on gold, oil, and currencies to U.S. residents.
And in the eyes of the CFTC, these are unregulated commodity options, so the company is forced to pay a $150,000 penalty.
But that was just a warning shot. In 2006, Congress passes the UAGA, the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act.
And this was absolutely apocalyptic for them.
To understand why, look at the mechanics of friction. The UAGA made it a federal crime for payment processors and banks to knowingly facilitate financial transactions for online gambling sites.
So overnight, U.S. users are forced off PayPal. You had to physically go to your bank, fill out international wire transfer forms, and wait days for funds to clear in Ireland.
And that friction is the death knell for a market that relies on high-speed liquidity.
So they officially separate Intrade from Tradesports to isolate the serious futures trading from the sports gambling, and Delaney becomes essentially exiled.
Yeah, at a 2007 Brookings Institution conference in Washington, he couldn't even attend. He Skyped in from Dublin, joking that as an Irishman, he prefers sitting in bars over sitting behind bars in an orange jumpsuit.
Which is just incredibly dark in hindsight. But I have to point out the ultimate irony here. Wall Street is simultaneously inventing toxic mortgage derivatives that will soon crash the global economy.
The subprime housing market, yeah.
Right. Yet the U.S. government is aggressively hunting down a site where people make $10 bets on elections. It's like ticketing a kid with a sparkler while the city block burns down.
It perfectly captures the hypocritical nature of financial regulation. Wall Street was deemed sophisticated risk management, while Intrade was deemed a moral hazard.
Which leads us directly into the 2008 elections. Obama versus McCain. It brings huge volume, but the company is still bleeding money.
Delaney even jokingly offers a market on whether Intrade itself will survive the year.
But the traders don't care about corporate drama. The lengths they go to for an edge are staggering. Like Joe Schilling and Ken Fitzpatrick trying to figure out McCain's VP pick.
They track a Gulfstream jet flying from Anchorage to a McCain rally.
Right, and they correctly deduce it's Sarah Palin before the news breaks, netting $25,000. Pure information discovery.
It is. But 2008 also introduces a completely new threat to Intrade, Nate Silver.
The rise of the quants. Silver builds a statistical model using polling data that correctly predicts 49 of 50 states.
And suddenly the narrative shifts. Maybe you don't need a betting market if a smart guy with an algorithm can do the exact same thing using polling data.
If an algorithm and a crowd get the exact same answer, why do we need the crowd at all? Isn't the algorithm just cleaner?
It's a profound question. But the structural problem with algorithms is that once they become public and culturally famous, they paradoxically ruin the market.
Wait, how does an algorithm break a market?
Because a healthy prediction market relies on a diversity of thought. You need a guy tracking jets, a reporter looking at yard signs. But when an algorithm becomes dominant, the dumb money just blindly follows the algorithm.
It's like a GPS app. If everyone uses the exact same shortcut to avoid traffic, the shortcut instantly becomes a massive traffic jam.
Brilliant analogy. The market stops being a polygraph and just reflects the algorithm, destroying the diversity of thought required for a market to function.
Wow. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Delaney is hiding a serious health issue. He's alarmingly thin, but masks it by running double marathons and taking 20-mile walks.
Pushing himself to the absolute extreme edges of human endurance, which leads to the summit. May 2011, Delaney decides to climb Mount Everest.
And he had been there before, reached 23,000 feet, but now he wanted the summit.
But he dies just 100 feet short. His body remains on the mountain.
And tragically, he never knew that his daughter, Hope, had been born prematurely just 3 days before his final push.
It is an absolute tragedy. His guide, Alex Abramov, suggests Delaney cut corners financially with a $40,000 expedition and perhaps hid his health. He said, "Sometimes people come to climb Everest, sometimes people come to die."
The prediction market community mourns him. David Pennock writes a moving tribute calling Delaney a peacemaker who believed a rising tide lifts all boats.
But Pennock also synthesizes this tragedy through the lens of prediction markets. He argued you cannot evaluate a decision purely by its outcome in hindsight.
Right, the concept of hindsight bias.
Yeah, decisions must be judged on the information available at the time. Did Delaney miscalculate, or was he taking a calculated risk with odds he accepted?
So what does this all mean? It's easy to say you can't judge in hindsight, but as a CEO with an ailing company and a pregnant wife, wasn't this just reckless gambling?
It is the ultimate debate over human rationality. And his sudden death threw the company into absolute chaos, ushering in the final chapter, Life After Delaney.
Right, the 2012 election, Intrade's final massive moment. Enter the Romney whale.
An anonymous trader who dumped $3.8 million into the market to artificially prop up Mitt Romney's odds, despite polls showing an Obama victory.
The whale lost $7 million in total.
And this shattered the illusion of the perfectly rational market.
Wait, if the whale was making a dumb bet, why didn't the smart money just take the other side and crush him?
Because of the mechanical limits of liquidity. The whale had so much raw capital that he exhausted the liquidity of the rational actors. They didn't have $3.8 million to risk.
It's like pulling back the curtain on The Wizard of Oz. You think you're looking at this perfect supercomputer of truth, and it turns out it's propped up by a mystery billionaire making irrational bets just to mess with morale.
The market wasn't reflecting reality. Someone was trying to use the market to create reality. And then, in late 2012, the CFTC officially sues Intrade. Nate Silver even tweets in their defense, baffled by the government's priorities.
But in March 2013, operations are suspended. And the shocking twist, an audit reveals $4.2 million is missing from customer accounts.
Allegedly diverted by John Delaney before his death to a network of shell companies.
Including one literally named after Everest's exact height. Ron Bernstein returns to try and pivot back to legal fantasy sports, but Intrade is ultimately doomed.
It forces us to reevaluate everything we thought we knew about predicting the future.
From a trading floor idea about the NY Giants to predicting Saddam's capture to outsmarting polls to a tragic end on Everest and an Irish financial scandal.
We spent decades trying to build the perfect, rational prediction machine, using money as the ultimate truth serum.
But maybe the ultimate flaw in prediction markets isn't the math. Maybe the flaw is that the humans operating them, from traders holding bad bets out of loyalty, to regulators terrified of new ideas, to a CEO risking it all on a mountain, will never be fully rational. Does a truly efficient market even exist, or is it just another human illusion? Something for you to mull over.